Hi, I'm Sabrina Thompson,
And I'm Michael Peterson, but everyone calls me Coach Mike.
and we're going to talk to you today about STEAM experiential education. So, for the past 13 years, I've been working at NASA Goddard as an aerospace engineer, but more specifically, an astrodynamicist and an atmospheric physicist. So, what does that mean? That means literally, I design orbits. I design orbits specifically these days for Earth science missions. I have a U.S. patent for some work that I did here at NASA, which helps with guidance, navigation, and control systems. I'm also an author and artist, and I also own a company outside of NASA called Girl in Space Club. So when I was in high school, I was literally either on the basketball court or somewhere drawing. If I wasn't drawing, I was trying to get my parents to buy me a pair of sneakers, and usually they were a pair of Jordans. So I became the valedictorian of, my high school. However, I had no clue what I wanted to study in school. So I went to my art teacher for help. And she said, well, you're good at math, you're good at science, but you're also pretty creative. So why don't you try engineering? So I went to my physics teacher asking for his advice. Well, there's a lot of physics. Do you think I should do this? And he's like, you should stick with art. So I knew right then and there what I wanted to study. And so I ended up studying mechanical engineering at Stony Brook University. So literally, when I what happened was that started my journey, or at that point I should say in my journey. If I felt like someone doubted me, which I did feel that from the physics teacher, then that's the thing that drove me. So that drove me to become not just a mechanical engineering student at Stony Brook, but it drove me to be a walk-on the women's basketball team at Stony Brook. Although the coach initially told me I would never play in a single game. You can see one of those pictures, me dribbling the ball at a game against Hofstra University in New York. But I was also a part of the National Society of Black Engineers, or NASB. And so that's when I learned a lot about internship opportunities. And so pretty much after my freshman year, every year I would have a different internship. And so I interned at places like the manufacturing plant in Ohio. I interned at a local product design company doing some CAD work. And then I also interned at Brookhaven National Laboratory. So once I gathered all of those experiences, I picked out something about each of those internships that I enjoyed. And somehow my mind equated to, working on engines, working in the laboratory, and being able to design products using CAD. My mind equated this to enjoying working on complex systems. So systems that had systems of systems, so lots of subsystems. And I said, well, what's the most complicated system that you know? And then I thought, oh, a spacecraft. And so literally I decided, well, I don't want to journey into the work that, to get a job and start working yet. I think I'll go get some more education. But this time I want to focus on aerospace engineering. And so that's literally what I did. I went to grad school and I ended up going to Georgia Tech and studying aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech. And so at Georgia Tech, that's when I was introduced to NASA. So I was a part of the NASA Space Academy. I'm not sure if they still have it these days, but literally, I was able to get a taste of not every, but different NASA centers. So you'll see there in the pictures that I was able to go to Kennedy Space Center, but we were actually based at Glenn Research Center in Ohio. But that experience in and of itself sold me. And I thought, NASA has it all. The campus is like a huge, it reminded me of Brookhaven National Laboratory, but on steroids in a sense, right? But it also reminded me of a school campus, right, where you have everything you need right there. Like it's just huge. One building they're working on, you know, something that's, science based, and another building they're working on building spacecraft. Like, so literally, that was something that drew me in. So literally, after Georgia Tech, uh, I ended up at NASA. And so I've been there ever since. So when I started out at NASA, actually, I started out in the safety division. And then I worked my way over to the engineering division and started working on what they call collision avoidance. So this is where we look at a lot of the space debris. We look at anything that could potentially impact a NASA asset. So I worked in that area for maybe about a year. And so I developed some programs to help us to see these assets ahead of time and kind of plan for like maneuvering and such if we needed to, and just really trying to track out the trajectory of some of these assets. And then I started getting more into actually doing more trajectory and orbit design work. And so this is where I found my bread and butter. So I worked on missions and you'll see on the next slide, from earth science related missions to heliophysics missions, deep space and interplanetary missions and such. These are a few missions that I worked on. Um, the first being MMS, Magnetospheric Multiscale Mission. And for this particular mission, it focused on understanding this phenomena called magnetic reconnection. And so we did a lot of interesting flight dynamics work where we took 4 spacecraft and designed ways for them to move relative to each other. So there was lots of math, we have to think about the dynamics and how things move. And then being able to control that, one spacecraft relative to the other. That was pretty interesting work. And so I was there to see this particular mission launch, and it's still up there now. And we're still getting data down from this particular mission. PACE is another mission that is up and coming. So this is an Earth science-based mission. And we're really excited about this one because this mission will help us understand the effects of climate change as it relates to, the clouds, the oceans, and our whole like Earth system, if you will. And then I've also worked on some tech development where we looked at satellite constellations for other missions, but these are looking at small spacecraft, so what we call small sats, and looking at how these spacecraft could coordinate with each other to take measurements. So instead of having one big spacecraft kind of looking down and taking measurements, imagine if you had a bunch of smaller ones and they can take measurements from different angles, maybe of the same phenomena happening on the Earth. This is another picture, if you will, of some of the other later projects I got involved with, where we started to think about how we can have spacecraft move relative to each other and communicate and do some autonomous maneuvering. And so these are things that are still in the works, but these are some things I've worked on. I ended up going back to school, but this time I went to UMBC to pursue a degree in atmospheric physics, because I was just, from these missions, I kept asking myself the why question. And usually when you ask yourself the why question, you kind of lend yourself over to the science side. So I started to ask, why was I designing these orbits? Why were we developing this technology? What were we trying to find out about specifically Earth? And I got really interested in how I could use my engineering coupled with some new science knowledge to develop some innovative technology that'll help us learn more about climate change and how we could potentially, mitigate some of the effects. And so this here is an article written in Cutting Edge, which is a publication a publication of articles that NASA produces. And this particular article talks about some of the work I did while at UMBC, which was a collaboration with UMBC and NASA Goddard. And then outside of NASA, I get to use more of my creativity, and I do that through my company, Girl in Space Club. And so, one of our big initiatives that we started, which occurred the end of last year, is designing a spacesuit for women. And we started off by basically designing a flight suit for women. So, in this case, and in many cases, we tie art, fashion, and STEM together to do that innovation work. This particular mission, they were simulating a Mars mission. So this was the first all-female crew that actually wore the flight suits I designed, and they were the first to give us feedback and everything for from it. But literally, this happened this year. Our goal is to use art, fashion, and STEM to encourage more girls to become tomorrow's innovators. Our vision is to empower and inspire youth, especially girls, through art, fashion, and STEM. And of course, we have to have this space focus. So this image here just shows some of the interns that Girl in Space Club has had. Maria is going to study robotics and biomedical engineering, and Jordan is going to go on the pre-med track. But literally, these girls worked on a space helmet heads-up display. So if you think of the movie Iron Man and like his helmet, and when it has all the information, all of the parameters showing up in his helmet, these young ladies worked with me this past year to develop their own version of that. They 3D printed all of the parts. They literally like did such an amazing job. So all of that to say, literally, like from the young girl who was playing basketball and only making art to this woman who became a NASA engineer who still uses her art and creativity to this day. I think this goes to show that there's definitely benefit to merging STEM, right? The STEM and the art, but highlighting the art a little bit more and using that as a way to engage more youth in the tech side, in the STEM part.
Hey, everybody. Michael Peterson. I could tell you a little bit about why they call me Coach Mike, but I won't because I want to make sure that you walk away with some hardcore pedagogical practices to really be able to push forward STEAM in any classroom that you decide that you want to enact and entertain your students with. And so a little bit about myself. I went to FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology, where I studied advertising communications. From there, I kind of did a plethora of things around AdCom, music industry very heavily, and then kind of jumped into tech, engineering, and gaming, and then even delved into CE throughout my career. And so that's about a 15 to 20 year stint in that industry. And so saw an ad on a train talking about educators and how educators were needed, specifically Black men within the education system in New York. And I said, you know what? I think I could take all of these, 20 some odd years of experience and really begin to connect that to the future generation. And I think that was extremely palatable and important. Went off and got a master's in education from Brooklyn College, and kind of decided I was going to combine, what my life's purpose was going to be. So beyond creating and being a creative and doing really cool things, how could I take that and prepare the next generation to do some awesomeness? And within that, learn some amazing pedagogical practices that I'm going to share with you today. And I believe, just to share a specific project I did most recently, did this huge project with L'Oreal focused around how can we combine math and movement, right? So everything we did everything from playing golf to playing football and basketball, and incorporated math in that entire spectrum. And this is in a K-5 um, environment. And so just to let you know that these are tips, the tips that I'm giving you are things that we actually do, things that I do all the time. And we'll talk a little bit about, the not-for-profit I started and the art that I do, but I want to make sure you get some good tips. So tip number one, we're going to integrate STEAM. STEAM, just the A is art. So as you heard Sabrina talk about, like, art was her gateway drug to being at NASA. You really have to understand that K through 12, this is going to be a really pivotal point of play for students to kind of really figure out, where do I want to be? So we want to integrate STEAM into real world applications. And that can be everything from going to the grocery store or shooting a jump shot. It all happens, it all interconnects. All right. We want to foster a collaborative learning environment. One thing that students really have to understand is that no one is an island when we talk about building out and working in STEM. You're going to work in teams very consistently. So it's going to be important that they understand how to be collaborative, and build that in their classrooms. And of course, you can lead that, but you can also let them lead that as well. We'll talk about that when we get to that bullet point. Encourage creativity and artistic expression. This doesn't mean that they have to illustrate or draw. It can mean they can be photographers, they can be cinematographers, they can sing, they can write, they can do poetry. It's all levels of creativity are important when building the critical mind. Okay. Next, we want to utilize technology and digital tools. I know AI seems to be banned in every school building that we walk into, but we have to get them using the technology of today, yesteryear, and the future if we want to make sure that we're really getting them across the threshold to join these STEAM disciplines that they want to get into. And then, of course, we're going to promote inquiry based learning. And of course, we know that as a pedagogical term, we want them asking questions. We want them to really be able to critically think and use logic to push things forward. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is give you examples of what these things look like. So integrating STEAM into real world applications, you got to take them out. You got to get them outside of the school. Field trips are extremely important. If you're not able to see it, how can you possibly be it? And that doesn't mean that it has to be, we're going to NASA. I want to also tell you, you can go to Top Golf. You can go to the Museum of Natural History. You can literally go outside to the park and dig in the ground. These are all STEAM activities that are extremely, extremely important. And you can build curriculum around them or follow the curriculum that's within your kind of scope and sequence throughout the year and make that happen. Guest speakers, please invite people like myself and Sabrina to your classrooms. You need them. It doesn't have to be. The great thing about virtual is that you can have them zoom in, you can have them stream in, and they can talk to your students, but they will be able to share their experiences at a maximum level in order to really pique the interest and make this a real world application. And of course, we know projects are important. So we want to build out project based learning. Okay. We want to assign open ended projects that require them to really think about how they're solving problems in the world, right? And that can be everything from, there's so much trash on the ground. What can we do with that? Or even bigger, if you're in a city like mine, which is New York City, how do we get rid of the smell that happens in the summer, right? That's a pretty real problem. But imagine all of the things that will come out of the conversation and critical thinking and application of interdisciplinary learning within those solving those problems. We talked about fostering a collaborative learning environment. I love this picture of the astronauts working together. If they don't work together in space, they don't make it home. So it's really important that you begin to think about team building. We really want to jump into understanding what the roles are. What are the roles, right? As specifically around the expert roles, right? If someone is really good at note taking, or if someone is really good at figuring things out, or leading, or leadership, really begin to break those down so that the students know how these roles fit into play. We have to encourage creativity and artistic expression. Okay. And a good way to do this, let me tell you, let's do some STEAM inspired art challenges, right? It could be anything, you could be learning about Caesar, right? And it could be like, okay, here's a quick shot, art activity. Draw a picture or your interpretation of what Caesar looked like, right? And that is and of course, whatever you decide the output of that could be, maybe they get 5 extra points. Maybe they don't have to do homework for a particular day. But any way that you can engage students to really feel challenged, but also feel like their input matters. And I just want to let you know, like, there's science everywhere, there's tech everywhere, there's engineering everywhere, there's art, there's math, and everything that you do. So really try to get into that. And not only do that, but also exhibit their work, right? Using digital tools, okay? I know sometimes this can be very scary. I know it can be time consuming to really learn something new, or a new piece of software, a new piece of technology. But yeah, let's kind of look at open source things that we can use, right? We can use virtual labs like PHET, right? That really create interactive simulations and virtual dissection tools. And we can also dig into digital project platforms that go beyond Google Docs. But think about Canva, really dig into things like Tinkercad, which are amazing. So I really want you to think about what are some tools. And this is also where you can bring in those guest speakers. You don't have to be the expert. Contact an expert that knows CAD better than you possibly could, and have them run a workshop. You get a little bit of free time, maybe you can, do some data collection and data analyzing as they're teaching. It really allows for you to open up your classroom and make it collaborative. Okay. Once again, really giving the students an opportunity around inquiry based learning. STEAM is really heavily built on skills and inquiry, right? You don't have to be on one side or the other. But I want you to really think about, okay, how am I leveraging those that are really skilled, and how am I making them think beyond, right? So we want to really encourage students to pursue their interests and propose research projects. We know, especially as we get into higher ed, that research is the key. Lord knows I am looking at that doctorate and I'm thinking about how I'm going to spend the next 6 years of my life just researching, right? I say six because I know I won't be able to do the three. It's impossible. For me anyway, right? But how can we really dig into research and really learn how to jump into that academic writing and proposing research projects and ideas, and also too getting them to work with their peers and say, like, listen, this is something I'm really interested in, right? Like, why does the street have to be concrete? Why can't the street actually charge cars instead of using car batteries? Different things that they can think of that are really palatable, powerful, and important. Okay. And we want it to be open ended problem solving challenges. We don't have to get to the finish line, right? The whole goal is to continue to work until we find something, right? And so, something simple, like I mentioned, sustainable transportation, right? When you're in a city like New York City, Lord knows you will be waiting 30 to 45 minutes for a bus. It might happen, right? How do we solve that problem? How do we solve that challenge? How do we shorten the amount of refueling time? How do we put out, different sustainable options that exist? This is a very open-ended thing. We don't know that it's going to be solved immediately, but we do know that it's possible. And so, with that possibility, then comes the imagination. With that imagination, then comes a project plan or an iteration or something that we can do. And so, I think if you have the opportunity to really build inquiry based learning, you'll see that there are some awesome, awesome ways to go about this. And this also introduces them to labs and research. Super important. All right. Now that we've kind of gone through those bullet points and we've exhausted these ideas, one thing I know as an educator is there are always tons of ideas and not enough examples. So what I'm going to try to do is really give you something tangible that you can take home and kind of think about. Now, me and Sabrina, we both love sneakers. Like, I'm a sneakerhead, she's a sneakerhead. We love sneakers, but within the design of a sneaker, there is so much that you can use around activities across the board in every single subject matter. So I'm going to run you through this very quickly so you can kind of get that, right? All right. Why are we looking at sneakers that look like cars? Well, what you'll find, and many of my friends who are some of the top designers in the world in the footwear industry all wanted to design sneakers, right? And of course, when you go into industrial design and you really dig into the tenets of industrial design, you're really begin to think about, wow, okay, designing a sneaker and designing a car are very similar. The math around it, the understanding of ergonomics, how a thing should work. So when you're thinking about this idea of designing a sneaker, you're really designing a rocket ship. You're really designing a car. You're really designing a couch. You're really designing a television. You're really designing a heating system. You're really designing sustainable energy systems. It's just getting into the concept and idea of building a thing that is utilized in our society, right? And so, just to keep that in your head as we go along. Like a car, shoes move people from place to place, right? So imagine just having that introductory conversation, right? What's your favorite car? Well, can a shoe be a bicycle? What's the mechanics around a bicycle? What's the mechanics around a car? How do the different pieces work together? You can begin to really have this conversation around what a car is like and what a shoe is like. And then you get into components, right? When we talk about components, it's that's you're connecting to engineering. Of course, even digging deeper, because we have to talk about the systems by which you're manufacturing, which is also created, like Sabrina said, when she was, in while she's at NASA, she talks a lot about subsystems and systems, right? So you're also digging into the vocabulary, right? Learning the terms and terminology around building a thing, right? In a really simple, easy way. Sneakers are not just made out of air. Okay. So when you go into materials and materials design, you really begin to dig into chemistry. Okay. You're beginning to dig into physics. You're beginning to dig into all types of things that you can kind of pull out. Of course, going all the way back into other things that you can really add in, of course, within your STEAM is history. Now, most people don't know this, but at FIT, as a freshman, you have to take a history of fashion class. Yes, it's a real class. It really happens. But I never understood until I got maybe to my third, fourth year in my professional career as to why. It's because materials change over time, materials usage change over time, right? The cars of today are not made with the same material that a 1972 Buick Riviera is made of. Two totally different things. And why is that? Right? Getting into that inquiry. Okay. So you could always jump into, what actually makes up the shoe, right? And so within that, with brands like a Nike, you're beginning to really dig into these different components, okay? And each of these different components have different technology within it, right? We all know about Air Jordan, right? Air Jordan. Well, the Nike Air technology is a proprietary technology that was created by Nike, and it had really had nothing to do with Michael Jordan being able to jump through the roof. It had everything to do with how do we market this technology that we've created, right? And so let's create Air Jordan, right? It's all of these things that are very cool. And I know, okay, kids might not be into Air Jordan as the player, but they surely at least one or two of them are walking around in a pair of Jordans as we speak right now and as you're teaching them. So it gives you the opportunity to say, hey, listen, did you know that in the midsole of your shoe there's this technology? They're like, what technology? How does that work? It gives you a whole nother point of entry to have a conversation around what is in their footwear. Okay. And here you have different technologies: Zoom, Zoom X, Max Air, Free, React, Lunalon. Like, so much that you can dig into it. Also, too, there's a big history to how these technologies are developed. The same way there's a big history in our entire world around going to space, around rocket launches, around, right? So if we wanted to break down a rocket, right, and we wanted to look at the midsole, the upper, the right, it's all of those things that we can definitely reconnect these ideas to. Just really demonstrating the different technologies, and then talking about the people that make these technologies possible or utilize these technologies within their designs. Someone like Tinker Hatfield, who did not start off as a sneaker designer, right? He was an industrial designer, architecture, just all of the different things that he was into. And if you want to jump into something that's really cool, the Nike Air Max is based off of a piece of architecture in Paris, right? So then it allows you to kind of break into your history, talking about ancient Rome and ancient Europe and how these things are currently informing designs that are here today. Sports is a great way to really get students outside of the classroom and really think about, okay, how are we applying this physics course, or how are we applying this chemistry course, or anything around art. It really can allow you to talk about that, and the running shoe is a great way to do that, because it really, you're talking about aerodynamics. I mean, it's extremely important. Biology, anatomy, all of these things really interconnect into this idea around the shoe. And of course, digging back into the technology, the Zoom Air. Okay. And I would love to show you this video, but I want you to look it up for yourselves because we don't have that much time. But really looking at Kipchoge and how Kipchoge broke the record for the marathon and why he is so pivotal in this idea of not only creating the shoe. I had a wonderful opportunity to visit the Nike campus and see the actual shoe that he wore to break the record, right? And also visit the building of innovation and how they really come up with these things. The reason why this lesson is so cool is because this all started with a waffle iron, right? This all started with this whole thing of like, you can make waffles, but you can make your soul like a waffle, and that will help. I believe it was Oregon or Portland, yeah, Oregon University, Portland. I forget the school, University of Oregon, that built a award-winning championship track team, right? And so thinking about how, once again, how all of these things are interconnected, and this really brings it all together, especially when you understand the Nike ecosystem.
And here's our contact information. Feel free to connect with us if you have any questions, comments, concerns. We're here for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of this experience that you're in, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Absolutely.